There's one omega-3 that plays a much bigger role in rebuilding and maintaining the brain than most people realize. And it's not the standard fish oil almost everyone talks about. For a very long time, long before supplements were in industry, physicians relied on a different form of omega-3 for serious conditions, not trends or wellness fads. This particular fat was trusted in an era when results mattered more than marketing. What's interesting is that this omega-3 wasn't chosen randomly. It came from a specific source, prepared in a specific way, and it behaved very differently inside the body. And once you understand what it actually is, it completely changes how you look at omega-3s altogether. Most people assume that all omega-3s do essentially the same thing, and that if you're taking any kind of fish oil, you've already covered your brain. That assumption sounds logical, but it's where the misunderstanding starts. The source of the omega-3, the balance of fats inside it, and what comes packaged along with those fats all matter far more than people think. Two products can share the same label and still behave very differently once they're inside your cells. And when it comes to the brain, using the wrong form doesn't just mean weaker results, it can mean missing the effect entirely. Now, this is where most explanations usually jump straight to the answer. But that jump is exactly what hides the real reason this works so differently. Because the key difference isn't just the name on the bottle. And it's not even just about omega-3 content by itself. There's a deeper structural reason why one form integrates into the brain and another mostly doesn't. Until you see that distinction clearly, the comparison won't make sense. So before naming anything specific, you need to understand what the brain is actually built from and what it selectively accepts. If you break down the fats that physically make up the brain, you'll notice something very specific about their structure. The brain isn't just using omega-3s as fuel or as a temporary signal. It uses them as building material. Certain omega-3 fatty acids become part of the actual membranes that surround brain cells, nerve fibers, and even the systems that produce energy inside those cells. When those membranes are built from the right materials, communication is efficient and stable. When they're built from the wrong ones, everything becomes slower, weaker, and more fragile over time. Among the omega-3 fats, one stands out as especially critical for this structural role. It isn't just present in the brain. It closely mirrors what the brain itself is made from. When this fat is available in the right proportions, it naturally integrates into cell membranes instead of competing with other fats or being burned off. That's why the ratio matters so much. A product can technically contain omega-3s and still fail to support the brain if that balance is off. The brain is selective and it responds best when the incoming fats match its existing architecture. This is why people can take omega-3 supplements for years and still notice very little change in focus, clarity, or mental energy. It's not that omega-3s don't work. It's that the brain doesn't respond well to mismatched inputs. When the structural fats line up correctly, the nervous system becomes more efficient. Energy production improves, and the brain maintains its resilience over time. Once you understand that principle, it becomes clear that brain support isn't about taking more. It's about taking what actually fits. What makes this even more interesting is that this same source of omega-3 was once used for problems far beyond brain health. Long before modern treatments existed, it was relied on during times when infections were deadly and recovery depended entirely on the body's own defenses. That history isn't random. It suggests this omega-3 does more than support structure. It influences how the body repairs itself, how it responds to stress, and how well it recovers after damage. At that point, you're no longer talking about a simple supplement. Part of the reason for this broader effect is that this source contains compounds that don't appear in standard omega-3 products at all. These compounds interact directly with the immune system, supporting the production and regulation of immune cells rather than simply dampening inflammation. They're naturally found in places where the body builds and trains its defenses, which explains why they were historically linked to healing and resistance to illness. When combined with the right omega-3 structure, they create an environment where repair and recovery can actually take place. Now, you might be wondering why, if this works so well, the benefits aren't more obvious in people who already consume fats regularly. The issue isn't just what's missing, it's also what's competing. Certain fats that dominate modern diets actively crowd out these structural omega-3s At the cellular level, they don't simply coexist, they compete for the same space in membranes. And until that competition is addressed, even the right omega 3 can struggle to fully do its job. What makes this competition especially problematic is how deeply those competing fats embed themselves. They don't pass through quickly or get burned off easily. Once they become part of critical tissues like the brain, the eyes, or the systems that produce energy, they can remain there for a very long time. That means the effects aren't short term or superficial. Over time, this silent replacement changes how cells function, how signals are transmitted, and how efficiently energy is produced, even before any obvious symptoms appear. When the body doesn't get enough of the structural omega 3 it prefers, it doesn't simply stop functioning. Instead, it switches to a backup plan. Other fats are altered and used as substitutes to fill those membrane roles. On the surface, this looks like adaptation, but the replacement doesn't perform the same way. Communication between cells becomes less precise. Energy systems lose efficiency, and the nervous system has to work harder to maintain normal function. The structure may look complete, but the performance underneath is compromised. This helps explain why subtle issues like mental fatigue, reduced focus, or slower recovery often appear without a clear cause. The system is still running, but it's running on a weaker structural foundation. When the right building blocks are restored, performance improves, not because something new was added, but because the original design is finally being supported again. That shift from compensation back to proper structure is where real resilience starts to return. But structure alone isn't the end of the story. Inside every brain cell is an energy system that determines how well that structure can actually be used. Even with the right membranes in place, nothing works properly if energy production is unstable. This is where the conversation shifts from thinking about the brain as wiring to seeing it as a powered system. And this is also where the gap between standard omega 3 products and this specific source becomes impossible to ignore. The energy systems inside brain cells rely on specialized membranes to hold everything together and prevent energy from leaking out. Those membranes are built from specific fats, and their stability depends heavily on the same structural omega 3 discussed earlier. When that fat is missing or replaced with weaker substitutes, the energy system becomes inefficient. It's like trying to store power in a battery with damaged casing. Energy is produced, but it doesn't stay where it's needed. Over time, this inefficiency shows up as low mental stamina and faster burnout. Along with that structural support, this source also provides components that help stabilize the energy system itself. These components work alongside the membranes to keep energy moving efficiently rather than dissipating. When they're present together, the cell doesn't just make energy, it retains and uses it properly. This combination is what separates temporary stimulation from sustained mental and physical energy. Without it, even a well-built structure struggles to perform consistently under stress. And this is where things connect to a part of the body most people don't associate with omega 3s at all. Because the impact of these fats doesn't stop at the brain or energy systems. It extends to a critical barrier that decides what gets in and what stays out. When that barrier weakens, problems begin to ripple outward in ways that don't immediately seem related. But before explaining how that works, it's important to understand why this area is so sensitive to the quality of fats in the first place. The lining of the system is constantly renewing itself, and that renewal depends on specific nutrients to stay intact and selective. Certain fats and fat-soluble compounds help maintain the integrity of this lining, allowing it to repair itself while still performing its protective role. When those nutrients are missing, the barrier becomes more permeable, letting unwanted substances pass through and triggering unnecessary immune responses. Over time, that stress doesn't stay localized. It affects the entire system's balance. When that protective barrier is supported properly, the immune system becomes calmer and more precise instead of constantly overreacting. The body spends less energy managing unnecessary inflammation and more energy on repair and maintenance. This creates a chain reaction, better absorption, fewer immune misfires, and more stable overall function. At that point, the benefits aren't isolated to one organ or one symptom. They begin to show up as a general sense of resilience that's hard to attribute to a single cause. Another piece that ties this whole picture together is how the body handles minerals and structural support over time. Certain fat-soluble nutrients work together to guide where minerals are used and where they are not. Without that guidance, the body can misplace them, leading to stiffness or buildup in areas that were never meant to store them. When the correct fats and coactors are present together, this process becomes orderly, supporting strength where it's needed while keeping sensitive tissues protected. This coordination is one of the reasons the effects feel so comprehensive rather than isolated. Instead of forcing the body in one direction, the system starts regulating itself more intelligently. Support goes to bones, tissues, and cells that need it, while excess is kept away from vulnerable areas. When that balance is restored, strength and stability improve without creating new problems elsewhere, which is exactly what long-term support should do. So, when you step back and look at everything together, this isn't about chasing a single benefit or fixing one isolated issue. It's about understanding why a specific source was trusted long before modern categories and labels existed. Once that perspective shifts, the conversation naturally moves away from trends and toward fundamentals. And that sets the stage for why this approach has remained relevant across generations, even as everything else around it has changed. When something continues to work across decades and very different lifestyles, it's usually because it supports core biological needs rather than surface level symptoms. This is one of those cases where the body recognizes what it's being given and knows exactly how to use it. Instead of forcing change, it restores balance that was already built into the system. That's why the effects tend to feel steady and cumulative, not dramatic one day and gone the next. If you want to go deeper into how these structural fats work together and how to apply this understanding in a practical way, there's a simple resource that walks through the daily habits that support this process over time. It's designed to be used as a reference, not something you have to memorize or overthink. And once you've seen that, there's another explanation that connects this structure back to how different omega 3s behave in the body. That's where everything comes full circle.